So please take your seats. And I will change to German language now. No, to English. English for the interpreters. I will speak in English. So, dear colleague, dear friend Mauro Dattis, caro Mauro, dear colleagues, distinguished speakers, dear guests of our conference today, I have the great pleasure of welcoming you today here to our external conference of the EPP group of the Committee of the Regions. We have assembled in Brindisi, in Puglia, in the region of Puglia, to debate the topic cities and regions developing a territorial-based trans-European transport network, as you know. Before I start, I want to express my deep gratitude to our host, to our colleague and friend Mauro Dattis, the vice president of our political group. I want to thank him on behalf of all of you for the warm hospitality, for the reception that you have given to us, the members of our EPP group. We have more than 50 members present today here. And I want to thank you for the perfect organization of this meeting. It's great for all of us to be here in this beautiful region of Puglia, a region that is characterized by its history, by its cultural heritage, and by the wonderful nature. And correspondingly, it's no surprise that the economy of this region is mostly oriented to the tourism as well as to agriculture and maritime transport. Brindisi, as I have learned also last evening in the very interesting talks that I had, Brindisi has increasingly developed as economic center of the region, providing many jobs, for example, in the chemical industry, in energy and in aerospace industry, and as well as in the sector of small and medium-sized companies. Additionally, the port of Brindisi, we have seen some parts of the port, and in the afternoon there is the chance to see more of the port of Brindisi. The port of Brindisi is one of the most important commercial and industrial seaports in the Adriatic Sea. And if you take all these characteristic aspects of this region here, it's no surprise that the topic of our conference is of special relevance for Brindisi and for Salento, for this southern part of Puglia. Generally speaking, the trans-European transport network policy provides substantial support for the construction and development of transport infrastructure across the whole of the European Union, allowing the seamless, safe and sustainable mobility of persons and of goods. The territorial-based TEN-T policy should ensure accessibility and connectivity for all regions of the European Union, and thus contributing further to their sustainable economic growth and long-term competitiveness. However, this can only be achieved by properly applying the principles of bottom-up, multi-level governance approach and subsidiarity, engaging all levels of governance to work in partnership together. We, the EPP group of the Committee of the Regions, we insist on the need to strengthen the role of local and regional authorities in the political, operational, technical and implementing management bodies of the TEN-T infrastructure projects, as they are in many cases responsible for the maintenance of transport infrastructure. And moreover, the regions and local governments are best placed to identify needs and resources. Public-private cooperation is easier to integrate at this level, and management is more likely to be held accountable and transparent. These are some theses. We will come back to this in the end when we have to adopt our resolution about all these topics. I would like to end my short welcome speech at this point. And before I give the floor to our host, Mauro Dattis, I would also like to welcome Mr. Giuffrè. We met him already last night. He's let's say, the acting mayor of the city of Brindisi, and I think it's very fruitful that you are present here so that we have a strong alliance with the city of Brindisi, also connected, of course, by Mauro Dattis. So welcome again to everybody, and I already at this point of the conference I would like to thank all those who will participate in the two panels, and I would thank all the many interested in our topic interested guests that I see here, and it's getting more and more, Mauro, so I think it looks very well. And around 11 o'clock we will have the pleasure and the honor to welcome the President of the European Parliament, Antonio Tajani. I don't know the exact time when he will arrive, so we have to react on this. We have to be a little bit spontaneous, but I think this will not be a major problem for us. We are used to that. So, Mauro, thanks again, and the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, welcome in Brindisi, my city, my region, Puglia. It's a pleasure for me to have my group, the Committee of the Region, here in my city. Adesso parlo nella lingua madre.
I'll speak in my own language now, in Italian, if I may. I'd like to thank all of you for being here, and in particular, I'd like to thank Michael Schneider, the president of the group. You decided to accept Brindisi's candidature to hold the event here, and therefore I'd like to thank you and the colleagues from the Italian EPP delegation who supported this candidature. I'd like to thank Brindisi, my city, put forward by Mr. Giuffrè, the prefect, to enable us to host the meeting in this fantastic theatre. I'd like to thank the president of the Port Authority, Ugo Patroni, who's going to give us an opportunity to delve deeper into the details relating to the port system here. I'd also like to thank the partners, the sponsors of this initiative, who in Brindisi have supported the organization of this event. And last but not least, I'd like to thank my colleagues, the guests who are arriving, and the speakers who opted to take part actively in this event. Obviously, we'll be thanking President Tajani later on, who will be here at around 11. Linking the European Union internally between cities and regions is extremely useful, but also it's extremely complicated. Our point of view as members of the Committee of the Region is a somewhat difficult point of view in terms of harmonization when we're talking about this issue. Nevertheless, it's not impossible to imagine that the cities and the regions of Europe might be better connected among themselves. And it's not just a matter, as we've said frequently, of road connections or air connections. It's not just transport. Connections between cities and regions also involve links between the people. Over the next few months, we as the Committee of the Regions, will have to be coming up with a number of opinions relating to the Trans-European Transport Network. I've proposed, and you agreed, and I'd like to thank you for that, to discuss in Brindisi the future of the Trans-European Transport Network for two reasons. Because it's one of the pillars that we're dealing with in the Committee of the Regions on a European level. I've also done it because Brindisi has a specific feature which Michael summarized in such a clever fashion. Brindisi lives based on its logistical position in the Mediterranean. It exists because of that. Brindisi has been a privileged port, and it was a privileged port in the Roman Empire. From here, ships left for the east. It's clear that if the Romans chose it, its natural position means that I have to, and we have to, as the Committee of the Regions, talk about the Trans-European Transport Network here. Now, networks need to be reviewed, as the European Commission has launched this review procedure, which will lead to a new regulation which the European Parliament will be approving. The last one was approved in 2013. As the Committee of the Regions, we need to be present in this. We need to be present. We need to give our views on the need to extend the networks. I'm talking from my point of view, but also as the point of view of the EPP, which met in Dubrovnik. There's a whole area that has to do with the Adriatic and Ionic macro region, that is from the Adriatic coast in Italy to the Adriatic coast in the Balkans and Greece. And they're not covered with regard to previous TEN-T developments carried out by Europe. But there are other regions in Europe as well that need to be dealt with. Our colleague from Spain spoke about regions that really need to be looked at again because the flows have changed, even in Spain. And Jesus, yes, I've even looked at that information. And our colleague Blanc in France. We need to think about these things, and above all, we need to make an effort. And I'm going to talk about a problem. We're the representatives of the outskirts in the center of Europe, that is, the peripheral regions, and we need to bring the voice of the cities and the regions to the center of decision-making in Europe. But we've got another task as well, and it's that of bringing the voice of Europe to the peripheral areas. We need to convince our citizens that talking about the TEN-T network doesn't mean just talking about insignificant areas. It's about talking about a real development in an area because there's a link that a link going through Brindisi could determine the development or the crisis of a port. That's what's happened. In 2013, Brindisi, in November 2013, it was a strategic port in the European Union. It was a core port, and it formed part of the core port strategic network. And in December 2013, 1 month later, it was struck off the list of that network, like other areas affected by the new regulation. And obviously the consequences are that they're excluded from the priority financing strategies. And these citizens, they're our citizens, they need to understand that, but they can't, because they can't think that people like us who work and represent them in an important European institution, such as the Committee of the Regions, on European issues, don't form an important part of the decisions that affect the territories. In conclusion, I'd like to thank Michael and the European People's Party group for giving me this opportunity, as I think the other colleagues will agree, to enable my citizens to understand, and also the ruling classes, the political representatives behind the citizens, to understand how important it is today to play a role in Europe for the decisions that are taken and have a direct impact on local development. We are representatives of the local and regional authorities. I'm proud to be the vice president of this group and to be a member of the Committee of the Regions. And I should like to thank you for deciding to accept the invitation to come to Brindisi. I'd also like to thank you for everything that we're going to be able to do on the Trans-European Transport Network over the coming months. Thank you.
So, dann bitte ich jetzt Herrn.
So, Mr. Giuffrè, if you would kindly take the floor.
Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the city and express my heartfelt thanks for holding this important event here and bringing it to this city. So thank you very much. I'd like to thank the president of the group, Mr. Michael Schneider, for having agreed to this choice of location, and we hope that this will be of real use in drawing attention to this community and to this city, attention which it deserves, because nature has given this city so much. We heard about the strategic importance of the port, and it's really crazy what happened in the 2014, that this port was omitted from the national transport network. So the people speaking out on behalf of this community will say that our geographical position has existed and that we have the airports, the port. We're a natural candidate when it comes to allocating aid because of the strategic value of this city. And this will support the economy, it will help with social cohesion, bringing people closer to one another. So I think there's nothing fairer than supporting what the Municipal Council expressed in 2015, that Brindisi should be granted this attention. Now, our representative on the committee will try and ensure that after 2020 this can be done, and there's a great deal of optimism surrounding this, because this would be hugely helpful. It's no longer an aspiration, it's something that we consider really our due given all the factors involved. This, as has already been said, would help support the economy, create jobs, and provide an important point in intercontinental communication. So I do hope that this meeting will really be a point at which we can launch our will to see this done, and I do hope that your meeting will be very successful. Thank you very much, and have a good meeting.
Vielen Dank, Herr
Thank you very much, Mr. Giuffrè. Well, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, let's start with our first panel, and I would ask the speakers to join me up here.
Of the first panel to come to the front. Signor Ugo Patroni Griffi, Signor Massimo Cassano, Mr. Ivo Nesrovnal, and Signor Mauro Valducci.
So, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, guess the name of the first panel, A Thriving European Transport Strategy and Support, Development and Job Creation. We have 4 speakers this morning. I'd like to introduce each one in turn. We're going to begin with Mr. Patroni Griffi, who's the president of the South Adriatic seaport system. And I'd like you speakers to stick to 10 minutes, if you would, please, so that we can stick to our schedule, and then we'll be ready for President Tajani joins us. So the floor is yours, Mr. Griffi.
Innanzitutto,
Well, first and foremost, welcome to Brindisi. Welcome to our port authority. We're going to be spending the day together, and it'll be an honor to show you the port of Brindisi, one of the 5 ports that are part of our Southern Adriatic seaport system. So this is an organization that goes to Monopoli, Potabai, Barletta, and Manfredonia. With Brindisi make up the 5 ports in the system. The port you'll be visiting this afternoon is one that has an enormous potential. There have been some major, and well, there's still work underway. There's some construction work. Infrastructure is being expanded from the platform at the east. There's some 100,000 square meters that have been added with European funding. So it's all been done and funded for extremely expeditiously. So that's the good news, but unfortunately, the infrastructure ran 2 years late because of the litigation it gave rise to. That's so typical of the problems we have here in Italy, where it's possible for legal action to hold up strategic investments. So despite the 2-year delay, this was finished, in quotation marks, on time. So in the coming days, we're also going to be inaugurating the so-called Iron Bridge, that is to say the link with the railway, between the railway, the 3 lines that are going down to the port, and that way it's going to be linked with the Italian railways. And that way in future, when it comes to the freight traffic, that will be totally independent from the passenger service. So that will be a big improvement. The authority is also a candidate for further infrastructure work. We're striving to be a model in terms of the green economy, the area of green ports. And we would like to see our port be a reference port for dealing with natural gas imports and exports. And at this point in time, when we're redefining the 10T system, we would like to be given top treatment. We want to be deemed a comprehensive port as well as part of the Adriatic system that runs as far as Ravenna. But now we've got the motorway of the sea, so we are already one of the 4 corridors of the motorways of the sea. So we're already linked up with the other side of the Adriatic, and this way we could link up with further ports. So also, as was mentioned, our port has enormous potential. And the Italian legislature is discussing about the establishment of special economic zones for southern Italy. That's something that's vital, really, because the port is naturally linked with the hinterland. And as was mentioned, there's a lot of industrial development here now. And with the help of one and all, with our legislators, with the community institutions, I think this port could play a key role in the development of Italian logistics, and even throughout the Adriatic, really. So it's very important when it comes to the China belt that link up Asia to Europe. And this is one of the main channels, the Adriatic. So thanks to each and every one of you, and have a good meeting.
Vielen Dank, Herr Griffi.
Thank you, Mr. Griffi. That was very interesting. And then after our conference, we're going to have an opportunity together with you to have a look around the port and see exactly what's up. Looking forward to it. Ladies and gentlemen, well, we're going to skip Mr. Cassano since he's not here yet. Hopefully he'll show up. So now we'll hear from Ivo Nesrovnal. He is the mayor of Bratislava. We've been there too, been there more than once, in particular under the Slovak presidency. And he's going to tell us about his experience with these networks.
And dear guests, good morning. Thank you very much. I'm a mayor of Bratislava. For those of you who did not attend the Committee of Regions meeting last year, which was held in Bratislava, it's a capital of Slovakia, and the city of Bratislava is on the Danube River, 40 kilometers down the Danube from Vienna. And it's a fairly young capital, politically seen. Historically, of course not, it's 1,000 years settlement, but politically seen it's very young, because Slovakia is a young country. It was created through the split with the Czechs, so it's 25 years capital, which is not that long time to develop all the structures, fundings, competencies, as opposed to, for instance, Rome, who is capital ever since. So that has some consequences that we are capital only 25 years, because we have to deal with the daily life, which is always a bit ahead of regulation, and we have to deal with all the same things as the other European cities deal with, like urban agenda and all that stuff. Bratislava lies on the border with Hungary and Austria, which creates sort of a special problems, because the city grows into foreign countries. The people buy houses in Austria, the Bratislavan inhabitants buy houses in Austria and Hungary. They live there but commute daily to Bratislava and work in Bratislava, and then brings along, of course, special kind of logistics, legal and regulatory problems we have to deal with. Bratislava is on the Danube, as I said, and I don't know whether you noticed, but last week Financial Times was devoted a very large article about the Danube Valley, as they call it, as a sort of a European opponents to Silicon Valley. Danube Valley is supposed to be the development region of the future, and it's the cities of Vienna, Bratislava, Budapest, who are supposed to grow very fast and very well. And indeed, it's the city of Bratislava which is home to projects like a flying car. I don't know whether you know that, but it's a car who can spread wings and really start and land on highways, and it's getting into production. Then Bratislava is one of the European bases. Yes, it works. And Bratislava is one of the European bases of Hyperloop, of this American visionary Musk, who wants to connect all the cities and Bratislava with Vienna and Prague and whatever, and the Earth with the Moon, with Hyperloop. And one of the bases is in Bratislava. So in fact, it's a region which attracts visionary people. The downside of the success is that due to this OECD calculation, Bratislava is excluded from drawing EU funds because the calculation is made on the very small territory, and the profits, benefits, GDP benefits are assigned to a small amount of people, so the average is very high, and due to that we are excluded from drawing the EU funds except for infrastructure. That's the only one, luckily, exception. Anyway, so what are these problems? The problems we face are, of course, the same as the others. The city is growing too fast because it's the capital of 25 years only, so everybody moves in, and we have this problem of urban sprawl. So people are building houses and building on a green field rather to intensify the city. So the city grows very fast, and of course then the people commute very long distances daily, and we have more than 37% individual car commuters. So it's very high percentage of people commuting by car rather than public transport. So that's one thing. Then the other one is we have a good extended railway net on the city, but it's not in use for public transport. The railway system uses it only for transport of goods, but not a public transport. And that is one of the challenges we face, how to combine all the means of public transportation into one smart system. Mobility consists of, it's a system of moving people and goods, and it consists of many aspects. You have to incorporate railway, trams, buses, bicycles, of course. We're going to make a large bike sharing system, electrical cars. Most recently, we have individual investors proposing to the city to build a cable car over the Danube. So we are dealing with this, and I know there are examples in European cities having cable cars as a public transport means. So that is all very interesting. We, unfortunately, due to the lacking funding of the capital, we have to work with private investors on very large infrastructure projects. My predecessors have concluded contracts to build a main railway station in the city with an individual private investor, and sometimes you're lucky and sometimes you're not, and in this case Bratislava wasn't lucky, and when we're still lacking a railway system because the investor, it's a private company, went bankrupt. And so we face a huge problem with insufficient railway infrastructure. Then we have a luckily case with another investor who builds for the city a bus terminal, and that is developing very well. Talking about TNT, Trans-European Network, railway network, Bratislava was supposed to be the terminal of a TNT 17 project connecting Bratislava with Paris, and that was the famous problem in Germany, in Stuttgart, when they protested against this Bahnhof 21 initiative, when the Germans almost stopped the project because they have to turn down sort of the part of the mainway station, and they protested against it, so they stopped the Trans-European network. And at the end of the Bratislava, it was abolished as well because Bratislava was supposed to be terminal, and the terminal was supposed to be on the left bank of Danube, including a tunnel underneath the river, which turned out to be so expensive that everybody who participated in this project said that it makes no sense, and then Slovakia has become the only country which is not connected to the Trans-European network system because the problem was abolished. Anyway, so as I said, we believe that providing or losing the solution to the mobility is a system consisting of combination of railway, trams, public transport, buses. We have even these electrobuses, trolleybus we call it, bicycles, and even in airports. Currently we solve the question of extension of our airport in Bratislava, because Bratislava is 40 kilometers from the Viennese airport, and the question is whether we need 2 or 3 airports at a so dense populated area. Of course, each state wants to have its own airport, but economically it makes no sense. So that is the issue we will have to deal with. But all in all, I guess the city is developing well, even thanks, of course, to support and cooperation we have with our European colleagues, for which I want to thank you again, and thank you for giving me this short opportunity to talk about our city. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, lieber Kollege.
Thank you very much. Well, that brings us on to our next speaker, Mr. Mauro Valducci. Welcome. Member of the Transport Regulation Authority, National Board.
Grazie Presidente, grazie.
Thank you very much, President, and thanks for organizing this meeting. I'm also going to be talking about a few points in order to explain the Transport Regulation Authority, which was established in 2011 and started working in 2013 for the first time in Turin. It's an independent authority that responds to the government, and it's funded by transport services. Now, Europe's extremely important, and Italian legislators were the first in Europe who set up a transport authority responsible for all modes of transport. After the Italian example, many other countries have been following us, including France, the UK, Portugal, and others who are moving on to from a single-mode transport authority towards a multi- or intermodal transport authority. Now, over the past few years, we have, in application of the recast directive on the rail sector, we've been establishing the principles and criteria for related to transport in this field, and we defined these principles for all market sectors: goods, high speed, regional, and by that I mean local public transport and different rail systems. I'd like to recall that Italy is the only European country among 6 in the world that is involved in high-speed rail competition. We're a model that's followed worldwide in terms of understanding how we've managed to ensure that the incumbent doesn't fall in this sector. Now, in September 2014, we established regulation models to work out airport duties in application of European Directive 12/2009, which was implemented by the National Parliament. Now, we completed all procedures related to new airport rights that obviously have to do with passenger transport and freight transport in 13 national airports. As to the motorway sector, we have defined optimal management ambits based on a special model involving data analysis for over a 15-year period. Now, the measures of the regulation relate to all kinds of issues involving motorways and have to do with cost efficiency for different motorway sections with under about 180 kilometers. Now, for distances over about 315 kilometers, there's no presence of different economies of scale. This has led us to suggest to the concessionaire, which is responsible for establishing the territorial area within about 180 to 315 kilometers. Now, back to the port sector, since we're in a port city, the authority in 2016 launched a process seeking to adopt a regulatory act involving the entire port system in the country. Now, the procedure takes into account numerous data focusing on different port areas, and now we have a very important tool established by the government in terms of port development. Our objective here is to provide tools for all of our infrastructures in order to improve in terms of efficiency, so that there can be better, qualitatively better services at more competitive prices for a system that has become worldwide. Now, as to the rail corridors in particular in the field of the TEN-T network, we have been dealing with a corridor crossing our country, which is the Mediterranean corridor, because our authority is responsible for coordinating for this corridor the different regulatory authorities, covering the entire corridor section, which goes from southern Spain right up to the border with Hungary and Ukraine, and it covers, of course, Modane and Trieste. The authority, therefore, was declared responsible for this corridor in relation to management. Now, the headquarters are in Milan, and Article 3 of the agreement among the countries on this establishes that the authority is responsible for this, and obviously the management of the different sections, whilst every regulatory body is responsible for its national sectors that contribute to that corridor.
Voglio qui ricordare che
I'd like to recall here that the corridors represent a significant opportunity in order to improve the mobility or the movement of goods as well as passengers. Now, since we are with the members of the Committee of the Regions, I'd like to recall some activities carried out by the authority for these regions, the indirect regulation, as I was saying before, to establish principles that make it possible to assign or delegate the local transport activities on transparency, and above all to enable all those interested to acquire all necessary information and data so as to be able to participate in a public procurement activity. Now, in 2015, we wanted to make this opportunity more transparent and efficient, and we wanted to reduce any imbalances in terms of information between newcomers and incumbents. And we wanted to define extremely clearly the important components when it comes to public and local transport services. So the use of these structures, I'm talking about everything that has to do with public local transport, has to be made available to all those who want to take part in these public tenders. Now, in 2017, we sought to define the methodology for the different public service areas and streamline financing. Now, this comes from the requirement for enhanced mobility. We have a system that over the past few years has really been revolutionized by the presence and the start of a true industrial revolution, and we'll be seeing that over the coming 10 years. The start of something that's going to be implemented in Europe and throughout the world through the so-called Internet of Things. The transport sector represents for the economy, not only the European but also the worldwide economy, a significant sector. So over the next few years we'll be seeing a revolution that will entail the greater use of new technologies, new IT systems, which will completely transform the mobility system for goods and services. Look at Italy and Europe, how our mobility has changed through high-speed technology. Look at the change through drones of the ability to take goods to customers' homes. Look at the future changes. For example, in Rome, for people like me, it's hard to get about by bike. But look at how in our streets we've seen, or we will be seeing, driverless cars or different kinds of systems, making it possible for people to read the newspaper while their cars are driving along. This isn't a dream. It's been in development for some 25 years, and in the next 20 years, it should be a reality. Now, for all of these reasons, we think that the transport sector represents one of the main driving forces for the development of worldwide economy. And I'm sure that the TEN-T networks represent fantastic corridors on which these new technologies are going to be based. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank, Herr Valducci.
Thank you, Mr. Valducci, for your presentation. And this brings us on to Mr. Massimo Cassano, who's the Junior Minister of Labour and Social Policies in our national government. Mr. Cassano, you have the floor.
Grazie, buongiorno.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our guests. Thanks for coming so far. I'd like to thank the government on behalf of the EPP membership. Our government over the past few years has invested ever so much in infrastructure, and in particular when it comes to transport. I mean, there's been some major efforts made in Italy, and over the past few years, for instance, in 2015, the expenditure in transport infrastructure was increased by about 20%. In 2016, it went up as high as 26%. So there's a lot of attention, clear focus on the need to develop this sector, which is a driving economic force in Italy. And the government in particular, over the past few months and years, has put together and seen through some major infrastructure investment that had been at a standstill for a number of years. We wound up a major process. I'm thinking, for instance, of the Salerno-Reggio Calabria motorway. We established, well, we seen that there were investments in rail connections. We've run into a few problems in connection with other countries, in particular when it comes to maritime transport, shipping. And here the real problem is red tape. Let me just give you an example. We, as a large country for whom the sea is a part of our national territory and is very appealing to tourists, and that's why here in Puglia, in particular, tourism is such a key sector. And that's why we would like to boost maritime transport, because if you look at railway lines, it's tricky because of our landscape, and you can't just roll out the tracks. It's very difficult. Look at the link between Turin and Lyon. We're still struggling to see that through. So there's so much that we still need to do in terms of links up, and we've got to get the investment going. So the situation in terms of the geographical implication for railway makes it very difficult to develop infrastructure. Sure, we're doing it year in, year out, and we're going ahead with major investments, and that's been the case now for a number of years. There's the high-speed link, where it's, of course, a lot quicker to get to northern Italy now. But as said, rail is tricky in Italy for geographical reasons. The problem with maritime transport is the bureaucracy that just makes our life difficult. Look at container shipping. I mean, think of Rotterdam that plays such a key role, and not without being such a having the strategic location as we have here, the processing of containers in Rotterdam is done before you know it. In Italy, it just drags on, and I mean the costs for holding up containers, the costs add up, and that really impacts negatively on the development of our ports and of our economy. So there are some key areas where we are in a very good position, where the government has been involved in trying to speed up the machinery. But as said, all too often, it's the red tape that's just slowing down economic activity. So I mentioned Rotterdam, that has become the container point for containers, but we do have some major ports that are at the heart of the Mediterranean and at the heart of the maritime traffic in the Mediterranean, and are very important for the development of our country. So as I said at the outset, our government has invested ever so much in infrastructure, in particular in services, because when it comes to the impact in terms of employment, that was one of our focuses over the past few years. When it comes to job creation, in the past year, in these past few months, over a 6 months investment period, we've seen the creation of 200,000 additional jobs. So there's a real need to pursue down this avenue, which we believe is essential for the future of Italy. So as I was saying, there's maritime transport where we want to expand the key points, the ports of reference, because we have so many major ports. And what we now need to see to is investing in smaller ports that could generate tourist activity. So the whole attempt to speed up bureaucracy, that could have such a big impact, because in comparison with other countries, we're not the only ones. There's the port of Beirut, for instance, where that's such a major port. And if you look at the transport from Italy, where we're struggling under red tape, and then sometimes in other countries in North Africa, they've got the same difficulties. So when there's these differences in terms of the speed of processing as compared with Northern Europe, that really holds us back. So through investments, we're trying to iron out that problem. And we're committed to doing it, but we're really going to have to tackle some of the obstacles, as said, to be able to try to keep up with our competitors. So that said, there's so much good news as far as Italy goes. So the machinery is up and running, in particular in some transport areas. But there is room for improvement. It's a matter of making everything faster. So when it comes to the costs, when it comes to what has been generated for transport and services, for Italian families, transport is their third item in terms of the amount of money they spend monthly. So we want to reduce transport costs to the minimum because it amounts to some 10% of families' overheads. So that's something very negative. It's just way too high. Families in Italy are just shelling out too much for their transport. So, and they're having ever greater use of transport. But we as government are going to be going on focusing on this, reducing the costs of transport for Italian families. As said, there's plenty of good news, in particular when it comes to the employment situation. I think today throughout Europe, that's a key concern, as it's been in Italy over the past few years. We paid a very high price in terms of employment, but looking at the figures for the past few years, it's good news. There's significant growth afoot, and we went ahead with our labor market reform that I dare say is working, and it's working well. There's a number of countries throughout the world that are looking to go down a similar avenue. And when it comes in particular to services, when it comes to transport services, warehousing, that's something vital. So, and it said developments there are positive. So we want to go ahead with our investments. We've set aside significant amounts for transport, some 20 billion with the ANAS that we set up, 20 billion euro, with a view to investments in terms of roads and across the transport mode spectrum. So 20 billion euros in the coming years, tidy sum, I dare say. Prime Minister Gentiloni is all behind this, sees the importance of it, and knows the impact it can have on our economy. And as said, developments recently have been good. So to come back to the southern part of Italy, which I call home, we're seeing a lot of growth here, in particular in terms of tourism and in terms of services. And I appreciate the fact that we see the fallout of these investments firsthand here in Puglia. I mean, we could do more, of course, because there's so much that can still be done. And that's why, hopefully, in the coming years, the figures that we've seen in terms of growth in the past few months is a confirmation that we've got it right. So let's just hope we can go on improving. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cassano. I'd like to thank all the speakers. Thank you for all the information you've given us. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have an opportunity to discuss things now, or for you to tell us about your own experiences, ask questions of the members of the panel.
Kollege Dobroslavic from Dubrovnik.
Poštovani gospodine predsjedniče, poštovane kolege, zahvaljujem EPP grupi, predsjedniku.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the EPP group. I'd like to thank President Schneider and the other organizers for having organized this meeting on this subject. I think it is extremely important. We're talking here about good links between all the regions which link territories. It's very important for them to be linked. Regions which aren't linked can't move forward. Now, the Adriatic region is a particularly important one when it comes to this. European strategy for the Adriatic region and the Ionian has come up against problems because of the lack of infrastructure. There was a conference held in Dubrovnik, and there it was flagged up that it was important to have more axes in this Ionian Adriatic region. There was a conference of 97 municipal authorities which border the Ionian and the Adriatic, and this has resulted in today's conference, which is a very good thing. Brindisi and Dubrovnik are very close neighbors. We're just separated by a strip of sea. But having said that, in order to get to Brindisi, I had to fly first to Zagreb and then to Brindisi now, and then I've got to go via Rome to get back home again to Dubrovnik. So something really has to be done about this. I think the highway along the east coast of the Adriatic is essential. I think there have to be better links across the sea. There need to be better air links as well. And there also need to be good links and bridges between institutions and peoples. Now, if we look at the European Union's official documents, you've got the 10T networks. And it's difficult to see how all these projects, which are so important, are actually going to be implemented. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Jacques Blanc, please. Well, I think it's a very important political issue. Europe needs to demonstrate that although there are delays in implementation, it's not Europe's fault. Sometimes it's down to bureaucracy, as was being said earlier. But we're talking about things that are going to be done, but I think 20 or 25 years ago these were being talked about, and when it doesn't happen, people say, well, Europe is creating obstacles. So I think there's a political mission here in the context of Europe to demonstrate that the delays are not Europe's fault. They're often down to more regional or local problems. Then, if you look at the map, you see that north-south links, these days have been strengthened. If you look at the rail networks, for example, you were talking about Turin-Lyon earlier, but if you go down further, Perpignan, Barcelona, Madrid, Spain, via the Rhone Valley and the Mediterranean, if you look at these networks, you see that, well, this was classified as being an important network, but it's still not happening. There are still parts of the network, which means that if you're trying to take the high-speed train from Lyon to Barcelona, well, it was supposed to have been completed years ago. It was in national and European agreements that it would be completed, but there are obstacles, there are blockages. So I think politically, in the regions, we have to adopt strong positions when it comes to developing these networks, whether they be rail or highways or ports, because it is important for all of us. And we have to specify that Europe is prepared to push for this, to provide co-financing, and that any delays are not down to political shortcomings on the part of Europe. I think we have to do this, strengthen the idea of European participation. Thank you, Jacques Blanc. Mr. Botargo, please. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We can make a very simple statement. In recent years, in the recent 50 years in the history of Europe, from the end of the war on, countries and cities which are close to links have developed, and cities which didn't have these fast links have ended up in dying or failing to develop. They haven't developed companies, businesses, industry, and so on. So there can be no doubt that these links are vital, not only for the future, they've been vital ever since the Second World War. So investing more in infrastructure means that you're creating a European cohesion policy. We've just celebrated yesterday the end of roaming. As of today, we're all citizens of Europe. We can tour all around Europe, and we don't have to pay a penny for using our phones in a different member state. Now, this has been a huge success on the part of Europe. We've acquired this level of European citizenship when it comes to communications and the cost of communications and the phones that we use. Now, the president in Dubrovnik was right in asking the question, well, you can't have an Adriatic and Ionian strategy without a development strategy for the two shores of the Adriatic. And when we talk about developing the two shores of the Adriatic, we're talking about security, European integration. On the 12th of July in Trieste, there was a very important summit of the Berlin Charter, the Balkans, France, Germany, the UK, Italy, and so on, working for democratic stabilization of the Balkans and integration. But the whole thing is worth nothing if we don't create the infrastructure in order for this process to be able to be successful. In Macron's programs, I'm nearly finished. In Mr. Macron's program in France, one of his focus points is going to be launching an infrastructure investment program in Europe. Now, what we can say about this program today is that it's very, very good. If we look at 10T programs, 10E and 10, we have to say that we now have a fantastic program in Europe. But what's the weak point? It's that this program says that by 2030, we're going to have to invest 1,500 billion in order to be able to implement this program of updating our infrastructure and cohesion. So 30 billion in the Juncker plan. The countries are doing their part, but I think Europe also has to make its contribution to set up a European fund and give more emphasis allocate more funds to this development. I think from Brindisi we have to send out a strong call to Europe, say the program is excellent, but in order to be able to implement it, it's very urgent to invest in this policy, which will be a real European cohesion project. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Vielen Dank. Nächster Redner.
Thank you. Colleague Catania.
Thanks very much. I'd like to share with you a simple thought, which is the following. A European transport structure that is solid and supports development, which is the issue of our first panel, can't just be a strategy that looks at Europe internally, just thinking about links within Europe. And perhaps the current TEN-T system, the comprehensive and core network, is somewhat restricted in this way. When we think about a strategy for the development of a trans-European transport network, I think that the EPP, in accordance with our tradition, also needs to look outside Europe. And we need to think about the transport strategy that links Europe in the best way with what is outside Europe. Here we're in Brindisi. This is a place that is on the map of Europe and the peripheral areas of Europe. But if we're thinking about a network that's not just within Europe but seeks to open Europe up to the world, well, we're in a place that for some 2,000 years has been a port, an opening up towards the east. And I think that this is the challenge, the concrete challenge of our times. A few days ago in Milan, which is where I come from, we saw the launch of a rail link with China. In 12 days, a goods train can link Milan to China. Just 12 days. And that's what we need to look towards. Not just a matter of better links, even though that's important, linking within our continent, but we need to think about the transport strategy that makes Europe more attractive to the entire world and enables the world to get to Europe better. Perhaps a broader map would enable us to think about a transport network that is better able to look to the future.
Grazie, Raffaele.
Thank you very much.
And after that, I would like to give the floor again to the panelists to react on the interventions. Eleni, please.
Thank you, Michael. Of course, interconnecting the European territories is of extreme importance for all the well-known reasons. I'm satisfied that the inclusion of islands and island countries are included in the declaration that we are going to approve at the end of our EPP seminar, as all policies and projects have to be inclusive for all European citizens. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Eleni.
Thank you very much, Eleni. Now it's said, let's hear from our panelists. Mr. Cassano, would you like to go first? Yes, thank you. And I'd like to thank each of you because those suggestions are very helpful. They, I think, are going to move the discussion forward in our group. Also, when it comes to the exchange of information about what's up in the various countries. We've heard what the difficulties are in terms of linking up with Dubrovnik. The only link we have with Dubrovnik is with ferry service from Bari. These are daily trips, but and it's only in the summer, really. Now, when it comes to the issue of bureaucracy, I think that's been highlighted, and I still believe that that's really one of the obstacles holding us back, not just in the transport area, but just across the economy. So here in Italy, we just have these difficulties in terms of trade with other countries and day-to-day operations. Roaming has been mentioned, which we are so fortunate as to no longer have. I do think that's one step towards solving the many problems we're facing. And Catania was quite right in saying we have to look beyond the borders of Europe. So not just look internally, we have to look at those other major markets that are so important for the development of our countries. I mean, China was mentioned. I was in China a few days ago, and it's quite clear we want to expand our links with China, and there's still room for other things we can do. We're not yet there in terms of making the most of China. So to know that you can get freight to China via rail in 12 days is something very important, but there's other modes of transport where we should be seeing how we can be up to the challenge. We all know how major a market China is. Then with regard to what Mr. Gottardo said, where on account of the existing links, some areas fall by the wayside, the ones that we refer to as peripheral or outermost, but it just depends from where you see them. Then they become central.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. Mr. Nesrovnal.
What I collect from this discussion is that I guess there is a very broad understanding that the connection is clearly linked to ability to act, to solve problems. And those of you who serve the military, and perhaps that relates to men, know that there is this saying, no connection, no command. So as we are getting better connected through mobility systems, we are able to better act and solve the problems of our citizens. And there is a clear connection between transport connection and competitiveness, wealth and welfare. But let me make one political remark. I understand from this discussion, but also from the development we face recently in Europe, and that is the rise of extremism, radicalism. And I believe that when we connect people, when we open new regions, when we connect regions, that could serve as a way to prevent extremism, radicalization. Because when people meet each other, see each other, work together, like you, Mr. Herbst, explored me yesterday as you go to Ukraine to connect regions. That is exactly a political way how to prevent rise of radicalism, and we have that in Slovakia, and it's on the rise in all Europe. And I believe that support of fair and effective transport systems connecting regions is a very strong tool how to prevent radicalization, extremism as well.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. Mr. Valducci, would you like to comment?
Bitte sehr, bitte sehr.
Sì, due cose molto...
Yes, just two things very briefly. Not necessarily related to my activity, but I'd like to underscore what Mr. Bratislava said, because we're here to talk about transport and infrastructure and the meaning of free movement of goods and people, including safety. And I think this is a very fundamental issue relating to all of the policies that we see in a number of continents and countries in terms of protectionism, closing off, and concern and fear. Now, Transport for Europe, that's very important and more important in comparison to other continents, because as previous speakers have already said, Europe can actually attract so many citizens of the world whose mobility is on the increase, and that has everything to do with what Europe represents: industry, history, culture, gastronomy, tourism, and therefore connectivity and the possibility of getting to our continent quickly from any corner of the world is increasingly important for economic development on our continent. Thank you.
Herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to thank all of our panelists so we can wind up this panel. So thank you ever so much. That was very interesting. And thanks also to our members for those very useful comments and questions. So we're now going to have a 15-minute break during which President Tajani will be turning up, and then we'll hear his keynote speech, and then we'll have panel number 2 that Eleni will be facilitating, and then we're going to be addressing our Brindisi declaration again. So have a good cup of coffee for yourself. Group meeting, it's a great sign that we're going to have close cooperation in future. President, let me tell you, when it comes to the EPP group in the Committee of the Regions and the EPP group in the European Parliament, there's a lot of close cooperation. Often we get together and work out joint opinions. And as the Committee of the Regions, we have reached some agreements on our cooperation. But that's the letter. What's important is the spirit, and your presence here today attests to that spirit. We're talking today about transport. That's one major challenge. There's other challenges: immigration, terrorism. There's a reflection process that's been kicked off with a white paper or two and other measures. That's something we're going to be addressing as well. So I want to keep it short, just to thank you once again for being here. Mauro Datis is going to say a few words of welcome, and then we're going to have a quick video, just 2 or 3 minutes, about Brindisi, and then we're looking forward to hearing your speech. So thanks again. Mauro, it's yours.
Signor Presidente. President,
dear President Tajani, thank you. This is a gift, really. And I know how hard it was for you to get here in terms of the organization. So let me welcome you to Brindisi, my city. I love it, as we all love our own homes. So I appreciate the focus on our concerns for one day in this European setting. This is really an emotional day for me. We're very alive to the European dynamics. We participate actively. And what Michael Schneider has just highlighted, the feeling we have with members within the Italian delegation in particular, thanks to the presence of a European Parliament who knows our regions, our countries. Maybe we'll be able to do more than we've been able to achieve in the past. Before having the pleasure of giving you the floor, we've scheduled a short video. This was made by the local port authority, and it takes a look at Brindisi to help you and the other colleagues from throughout Europe to appreciate our city.
Io
Well, I am at home, and yet I'm emotional just seeing that.
Good morning, everybody. Bonjour à vous tous. Calimera, guten Morgen, buongiorno, buenos días, o hispanos hablantes también. I am very happy, dear President. To be here for me is a pleasure, it's an honor. I am, after 5 years, the first president coming from the European People Party. But, first of all, I am proud to be member of our family, the European People Party. For me, this is most important than to be President of the European Parliament, because we need to strengthen our values, our identity. Also to be proud to be Christian. I said during my speech in the Congress in Malta, I am proud to be member of this party. Thank you very much, President. I totally agree with you when you speak on the cooperation between the European Parliament and your Committee of the Region. I think this is very, very, very important, because if you want to work for a better Europe, we need to cooperate all together. The European flag is in the hand of the European People Party. We are the founders, Adenauer, De Gaulle, Schuman, but now our job is to change and to strengthen the European Union. Allow me to speak in my mother tongue, because I am in Italy. There are very good interpreters here. L'Europa.
Europe is experiencing some very difficult times at the moment. We've got 3 major challenges to deal with. Combating illegal immigration, alongside the difficult problem of refugees. We have to tackle the challenge of countering terrorism. We have to win this battle, despite the fact that our enemies are hidden everywhere. And then the third major challenge that we have to deal with relates to economic growth. Things are improving as compared with recent years, but within the European Union, we still have excessively high levels of unemployment, especially of youth unemployment. Now, as the most recent Eurobarometer pointed out, I agree that citizens are calling upon Europe to protect them better than it has done thus far. And they're calling upon us, as the European institutions, to protect them when it comes to dealing with these 3 major challenges. We have to perform our part on this. Of course, there are things that don't work, things that aren't functioning well. And this is why so many of our citizens are putting their faith in populist parties. I'm not so very worried about the existence of populist parties, but I am worried that the citizens are actually voting for these parties. Now, of course, there are things that aren't as they should be. That's why results of elections recently, Spain, Austria, the Netherlands, France, local elections in Germany, results tell us that the majority does want Europe, but that things need to be changed. And the EPP and the institutions have to step up to the plate when it comes to these challenges. A few days ago, when I met the presidents of the European Parliament's parliamentary committees, I said that the next budget should be the result of political choices. These major challenges, as well as the issue of innovation, security and defense policy, have to be reflected in concrete economic choices. And I think the budget should be a 5-year budget instead of a 7-year budget, so that there can be monitoring by the elected representatives. I think the budget needs to be a political one. It shouldn't just involve redistributing funds. Of course, money should be redistributed throughout the European Union, but on the basis of a clear political policy decision, so that policy can be the engine here. We need a more political Europe. Of course, it needs to be balanced by the Parliament, which is the only directly elected institution, which works to bring the institutions closer to the citizens. And of course, you have to take into account the different states as represented in the Council. Then you have the Commission, the executive body, and then the Committee of the Regions, which makes heard the voice of the territories, the regions. The territories and the regions aren't always saying the same thing as the states. We believe in the principle of subsidiarity. And therefore, we believe absolutely that the territories can resolve citizens' problems, but as part of a whole chain going from the level of the town, the city, right up to Brussels. And the Committee of the Regions has a fundamental role to play here because it offers municipalities and provinces and regions an opportunity to have a much broader take on local administration, not just closed within their own borders and limitations, but open all the way to Brussels, so that every town and every region in Europe sees that there's not only a national capital, there's also another capital, Brussels, which will defend the interests of the territories. Now, even when I was commissioner, I always worked very well with the Committee of the Regions. And I think it can and should continue to play a hugely important role when it comes to implementing the fundamental values which our political group holds dear, the principle of subsidiarity. Now, what can we do together to take on these major challenges? Immigration is a problem which is affecting all countries in the European Union. Now, over and above what we can actually do regarding emergencies, refugees and so on, some countries, Italy, Spain, Malta, Greece, Germany, have a very high number of refugees and migrants, but other countries are taking this problem on board as well. But as well as this, we have to look to the future when we deal with this issue. Look at Africa more carefully. If we don't do something today, if we don't start investing billions of euros in that part of the world, as of the next budget, we're going to have millions of people, not thousands, millions of people who are going to be moving from the south towards the north. Africa has to become a priority for us. If you look at the disastrous situation in Libya, in Europe, we're trying to find a way of just having one single government. If you look at climate change, means that the Sahara Desert is eating up hundreds of hectares of arable land, which means that thousands of people are having to leave the land they live on. Boko Haram, the terrorist organization, which the biggest in North Africa, is seeding discontent and conflict between Muslims and Christians. Then the situation in Somalia, civil war, famine, not to mention the example of Mali. Our French colleagues know what's going on there, what's happening in Chad, in Senegal. The newspapers tell us about children abandoned without families in desperate situations. We've invited the president of the African Union Commission to talk in Strasbourg to the plenary meeting there. We also, the other day, invited the president of Ivory Coast, Côte d'Ivoire. He'd been to Berlin and to Paris, and then he came to address the plenary of the European Parliament what's going on and what we need to do for Africa. We absolutely have to resolve this problem using economic diplomacy, promoting growth of SMEs, combating terrorism. These are things we have to do with the strong support of the United Nations. We need camps at the south of the margins of the desert so that we have dignified places for these people who are fleeing to go to. These camps have to be able to provide food and medicines. These are all things that we have to look at with particular attention. Now, the European Union is investing in these areas, but we're not doing enough. We need to do more. So I think Chancellor Merkel is doing the right thing when she travels to Africa quite often to meet many of the African heads of state. There was a meeting of these people in Berlin the other day, and we, as the European Parliament, are moving in that direction. On the 21st, before the European Council on Immigration and Terrorism, we are going to be inviting people to decide about issues relating to migration and immigration, so that we don't waste any more time. We have managed to resolve the problem of refugees with some considerable difficulty, the problem of people migrating via Turkey towards the north. We blocked the corridor, we invested. We made an agreement with Turkey, which Turkey is complying with. And even without that agreement, well, if Macedonia had closed its borders definitively, these people would have traveled from Greece via Albania and arrived in Puglia as their entry point to Europe. And so a wise political choice was made, a very intelligent political choice, the one whereby we reached an agreement with Turkey. Now we're going to have to do this in the future when there's a stable government in Libya. Italy did this. We need to do something to resolve the problem of migrants. It's not only an issue of security, it's also a strategic problem. We have to look at Africa very, very carefully indeed. Because if these problems aren't resolved, it's going to be the local regions, the mayors, the presidents of the regions, who are going to have to deal with the problem of millions of people coming to their regions. This is going to be a problem which will have a direct impact on local and regional authorities. It's forcing a number of authorities to solve the problems involving major sacrifice, big social tensions in the big cities. So this problem really has to be dealt with immediately before these migratory flows from Africa to the north become flows which become impossible to manage. They're so big. Then we need more Europe when it comes to terrorism as well. We have to enhance collaboration between our countries, collaboration on policy. We've got a Europol agreement. The European Parliament and the national parliaments have reached an agreement in Bratislava on the 25th of April, so that the European Parliament and national parliaments can monitor the activities of Europol. That's very important. We've involved Denmark, but we need enhanced cooperation when it comes to justice and intelligence too. I think we should be starting to talk about an FBI in Europe. We need more collaboration because the terrorists, well, the terrorist, for example, who carried out the attack in Berlin, traveled via France and Italy, came upon the Italian police and was killed by them. So these people move, and they've got cover everywhere. So we have to collaborate as strongly as possible so that we can win the battle against terrorism. A lot of foreign fighters go to Iraq and Syria, and then they come back again to Europe. Very often they're European citizens who carry out these attacks. We have to look at the situation in the Balkans, which is very sensitive. There's a danger that the Balkans become a new powder keg, and it's our duty to see what's going on there, to look carefully and try and promote political stability in a region in which there are countries who are candidates for accession to the European Union, and where some of the terrorist organizations are beginning to locate themselves. Now, in Venice, a month ago, in Italy, 3 terrorists were arrested. They came from Kosovo, and they wanted to carry out an attack in Venice. Now, another challenge is that of the Balkans and the relations between local authorities, local and regional authorities in the Adriatic region. That too could be extremely important. Then there's all the work to be done combating illegal immigration and terrorism in order to defend our external borders. In Bulgaria, Hungary, in the east, but also in the south. Europe has set up a coast guard, a border guard, I think rightly. The first initiative was carried out in Bulgaria a few months ago to demonstrate that Europe is willing to help the countries on the front line. And we have to move ahead in this direction. We have to defend our external borders because that is imperative. We need more solidarity with the countries in the south of Europe. Italy has 7,000 miles of coastline. So the other countries need to pay more attention to these things. Then there are other countries such as Germany, which welcomed Syrian refugees. We shouldn't forget this. We need to be involved in combating illegal immigration, but we should also never forget that there are so many political refugees coming in. Now, when I visited the border between Macedonia and Greece a few months ago, I think it was about a year ago, before the agreement with Turkey, there were boys wearing crosses around their necks, and we said, "Where do you come from?" And they said, "We come from Mosul." "Are you Christians?" "Yes, we're Christians." In Mosul, there are 3 options open to us. Either we convert to violent Islamism, or we run away to Europe, or we're killed. So when there's a crisis like that, how can we not welcome these Christians who escaped from Syria and Iraq? A political group, a political family such as ours cannot turn its back on these people. We say we're against persecution of Christians throughout the world. Well, when Christians are persecuted and they come to our countries, we can't not be prepared to open the doors. People who want to traffic in drugs and so on, well, absolutely not. If they don't obey the rules, well, then they'll be sent back home. And the same thing applies in the discussion about Dublin in the European Parliament. I think it's absurd that when it comes to asylum rights, you have the same rules in every country, but the way in which they're applied is completely different in different countries. A few weeks ago, I was visiting Gorizia, twin cities between Italy and Slovenia and Gorinj. There was a group of immigrants, quite a big group, and I asked the mayor of Gorizia, who are these people, these immigrants? They're aspiring refugees who are applying for asylum. They've been rejected in Germany and in Austria because they didn't meet the criteria whereby they could be granted asylum. So they hope that they can travel around Europe and find a country where they can obtain asylum. But if Germany says they haven't fulfilled the criteria, so they can't have asylum, the same rules should apply everywhere else, Italy, France, Austria. If one country says that they haven't fulfilled the necessary requirements to be granted asylum, well, that should apply throughout Europe. You can't have a sort of shopping market for asylum rights. We have to have the same rules applying to everybody. So we need solidarity, but we have to do things properly as well. Now, we need a labour force from outside Europe in Europe. So we have to have agreements. We have to have controlled flows of immigration into our European countries. The biggest problem, which does involve the regions, but also relates to the subject that you're talking about here, is economic growth. Now, it is very true that many countries have to get their affairs in order. The issue of public debt in Europe is unacceptable, and it's not going to do anything to help resolve the problems in our economies. But if, as well as reorganizing our public debt, we provide strong stimulus for economic growth, we will start to be able to reduce public debt. Now, if you're a family, you pay off all your debts. Well, then the next week you start working. We need a strong industrial policy, a lot of support for SMEs. We need to support agriculture, trade, the liberal professions. All of these things will help to create jobs. I don't think we should just spend money creating jobs or waste money, and nor do I think it's right to invest to create jobs. The investment works if the objective is growth, not just to create short-term jobs for 6 months. We need to create infrastructure not just so that we can have 1,000 people working on it for 6 months. We have to create infrastructure because having created this infrastructure, we will not only have created jobs, but we'll be creating opportunities for growth where we've created this infrastructure. Ports, airports, roads, it means developing trade, the economy, it means being able to export our products throughout Europe. We have an amazing internal market, but in order to develop it further and improve it in a number of countries, especially in the south, well, I think the idea is to get one of the corridors to stretch right as far as Brindisi, one of the 10T networks. And I think that would be a very good idea to cause economic growth in this region. But also, this is heritage for the whole of Europe. Tourism offers huge opportunities, but you can't have an industry without infrastructure. How is it going to be able to compete at global level? Efficient infrastructure brings down production costs. Now, we have this major global challenge going on. We've got China, India, the United States, Russia. We have incredibly high-quality products, European products from all sectors, food sector, cars, vehicles. They're products which the whole world envies us for, but we need the infrastructure throughout the European Union, which is going to be able to help us bring down production costs in our companies. We also need to reduce the cost of energy. That's another major problem. We have a European energy market in order to help our industries be able to compete. We have major challenges ahead of us. China is a huge market. We've reached an agreement with Canada, which is another huge market. Throughout Europe, in every country in Europe, there is some resource which doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. We have these very diverse products, all at a very high level. We may not be able to compete in terms of quantity, but when it comes to quality, Europe is the winner. But we have to enable our companies to be in a position to go out and win. So we have to improve access to credit, especially when it comes to helping SMEs move ahead. We have to carry on with our banking union. Also, when it comes to fiscal affairs, I think it's quite incredible that some platforms, Google, for example, search engines, platforms for advertising, they're present in Europe, but they don't even pay any taxes. They don't create any jobs. Everything gets sent back to America, so it's quite right that the European Commission should be setting up an infringement procedure and trying to sanction Google for all of this. The European Parliament has conducted a battle, and I remember that our group, Andreas Schwab from our group, was doing battle in this area, as was I, and Commissioner Oettinger said that we have to adopt a hard line on this subject. We can't just be opposed to platforms. We have to have rules which will protect our cultural industry as well. Now, of course, it's easier just to distribute films and so on, fiction, just in English, but we have wonderful products in this sector in Germany, in France, Spain, Italy. It's our duty to defend this part of European industry too. Now, this doesn't mean that we don't want digitization, anything but. This is a major challenge for our industry. Then another major challenge, climate change. We are bound to agree when the President of the United States comes out of COP21, because if we want to achieve a drop in temperature in the world, we have to work together. The world doesn't belong to one person or another. It's a heritage which we received and we have to hand on to future generations. Now, of course, we have to try and combine the interests of industry. We've got to feed our children. It's no use just having them breathe clean air. So we do need to have a global agreement, because we can't force our companies to leave Europe and go and produce somewhere else and to produce their pollution elsewhere. We have to carry on making progress on this. Now, luckily, a huge number of cities and towns in the United States intend to carry on with the commitments they've made. It's not intelligent environment policy to act against the interests of industry. For the 5 years I was involved, I said there can be a marriage between climate and industry. Modern industry is a sector which creates wealth with the green economy. Think of renewable energy. Think of all you can do with energy savings, solar panels, which we produce in Europe. Everything we can do relating to water. And all of this know-how, well, the Chinese, for example, want to hear about this. We're leaders in Europe. The Israelis have asked us about this. So we have to have a modern, competitive industrial policy. We can't just be stuck in the 19th century. But our industrial policy has to support SMEs. And we should never forget that. I really emphasize that we need to promote access to credit because it's absolutely fundamental. We've fought so many battles to try and help small banks, the ones that are the closest to the people, because a big bank may be very useful when it comes to major investments at the other end of the world, but small farmers, small traders, if they don't have a regional bank where they're known, which will help them, which is linked up to local institutions, well, how can you facilitate access to credit? How can you give the farmer, the trader, the craftsman the confidence to carry on with his small company if he has a difficulty in accessing credit? He needs help. Now, in the EPP, well, I can remember when I was in the Economic Committee with our President Balz. We tried to ensure with Basel IV, with the SME supporting factor, which enabled banks to give loans to SMEs up to 1.5 million euros if they had reserves which are lower than the reserves required when making loans to big companies. So it was an expression of faith in the SMEs. But it was also a victory on the part of the EPP members within the European Parliament, because that was our own initiative, supported by other people, of course. But from this point of view, I think we should note that our group were forerunners on that. So these are all the areas in which we need to collaborate. We have to collaborate. So I will try and be very much present. I've invited you to take part in the event taking place on the 21st in the Parliament on immigration. We'll be looking at it from different facets. We need functional cooperation. You can count on me as Vice President of the EPP, as President of the European Parliament, because I firmly believe that the local and regional authorities have a major role to play, not least in explaining to citizens that Europe is not only there for purposes of bureaucracy, not just the baddies who hand out rules and deal with all these little things. Europe is our identity, it's our history. When the King of Spain came to speak to the European Parliament, he said something which is very symbolic. In Spain, we are Europeans because we're Spanish. Well, we Italians are Europeans because we are Italian. You Germans are Europeans because you are German. How could one not believe that our cultures are all entwined? Our civilization began with ancient Greece. Then the history of Rome, Christianity. But if there hadn't been Caravaggio and Rembrandt painting their pictures, well, if you say, who's the biggest historian of Roman times? Omsen, who's German. Beethoven was German, but we all understand his music. So it's a heritage which belongs to all of us. I visited the University of Perugia a few months ago, and at that university, they told me that in 1400 there were students who came from Spain, France, Germany, hundreds of students. And it was they who built our common culture. Being European doesn't mean giving up your own language or your own identity. I'm very proud to be Italian, but I'm also proud to be European. Because when I listen to Beethoven or Mozart, I'm listening to something which belongs to me. Roman law belongs to the Germans who developed it. Who really studied Roman law? The Germans. Who brought Roman law into Europe? Napoleon. Well, you see that everything is interconnected and entwined. Now, how many Italian words come from Greek? Each of you, we could talk about this for hours and hours. Every one of you could give me examples. This is why we're here together, because we have this huge ideal. Of course, there are specifics, but we are the European People's Party group, political family, and we should always remember that quite apart from dealing with issues of economics, terrorism, and so on, we have these values which we have to convey to our children. And our identity and our civilization are things that we cannot give up. Being European doesn't mean being anything else at all. And I think the world needs this identity. And the stronger our identity is, the more we can talk to other people. It's only if your own identity is weak that you're afraid to talk to other people. If you have a strong identity, you're not afraid to talk to other people. You're prepared to go out there and talk to people because of your strength. So, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I think as the European People's Party, we and you who are the representatives of the European People's Party in the regions of Europe, you have a major task. You have to give this dream of Europe, which has nothing to do with banks and the euro or the institutions, you have to convey this dream to your young people, your young citizens. Enable them to dream. Enable them to dream. Now, I really am going to finish now, but I always talk about the day that the Rome Agreement was signed. The story of the first Spanish emperor, the first Roman emperor, whilst well, can a non-Roman become the emperor of Rome? And he was told, Rome is not a city. Rome means all of our legislation, all our roads, all our aqueducts, all our law, our civilization. Rome is our identity. It's not a local issue. And here I think Europe is our history, our identity. It's a heritage which we cannot give up on, abandon. We have to believe in it, and the European People's Party, a family political group, has an obligation to uphold the values which demonstrate this model of civilization. Thank you very much indeed.
Presidente, tu mi permetti, io vorrei...
If you will allow me, I'd like to recall today a European Parliament colleague of mine, member of our political family, who's no longer with us today, a great mayor of the city of Brindisi, our former colleague, Domenico Beniti, a great European member of the European Parliament and a great citizen of this city.
Lieber Herr Präsident,
Dear President, Mr. Tajani, you've heard the applause. You've really spoken from our hearts with that passionate speech on behalf of Europe. with all the individual facets you touched on. Me personally, what I really liked is your reference to our historical roots. I see it as you do. Our common history is a commitment we've entered into to put together a joint future. And we can do that when it comes to the challenges we're up against if we manage to solve the problems. That way, we'll have the assent of the people, of our citizens. We've got to deliver. Talk is nice, but we have got to deliver. That's what we can learn from history. And something else you highlighted that I'd like to underscore, a lot of these problems that we're confronted with today are problems that impact on our regions and cities. Refugees don't arrive at the national level. They turn up in towns, villages, cities, and we've got to find down-to-earth solutions, healthcare, schools for the kids. These are the challenges our LRAs are facing. And as you've said, that we need to work together. I hope we will. Unfortunately, we're short on time. It's no time for a discussion because there's dozens and dozens of reporters, journalists just outside the door. You can understand that. So thank you once again. And you did give a few pointers as to where we could work together in future. And you said it's going to get your full backing. Thank you very much for that. It's very important for us to have the European Parliament as a talking partner. There are some problems we can't solve, but you can. So to finish, thanks again.
And now there is a great challenge for First Vice President Eleni to chair the last part of our conference. You have 50 minutes for the second panel and for the resolution, but you all will help Eleni, I am sure. So please go on.
So, dear colleagues, we should go on. We have a very tight, we are very pressed for time. And please, let me say that starting this second panel, we will present best practices on how to support targeted public and private investments in transport, in infrastructure and systems, which can generate considerable direct and indirect employment effects at a time when unemployment remains high in some EU countries. We aim to show how to encourage greater synergies between different funding instruments and contributions from supranational, national, regional, and local sources, together with public-private partnerships to alleviate this. Furthermore, we highlight the need to strengthen the capacity of LRAs to use innovative financial tools in delivering investments for the fulfillment of the policy's objectives. I would like now to kindly ask the speakers to stick to the time allocated, which I'm sure they will. And Mr. Dimitar Savov, please, you have the floor.
Yes. I have a presentation with slides, so probably 1 minute till it's here. And okay. It's a pleasure for me to speak to such distinguished people here, and in the next 10 minutes I will try to speak about the development of the Trans-European Transport Network in Bulgaria, starting with the overall development, with the corridors, then speaking of some good practices with projects which have a big impact for the regional development, also for some projects which are a good example of very good cooperation with the local authorities. Starting with the geographical location of Bulgaria, of course, it has a key role with the connection of Europe and Asia, with the Middle East and Far East, and this geographical situation has two main, one advantage and one, let's say, a disadvantage, because with this geographical location we have a lot of very important priority links which we have to modernize, and this is good because we can justify the European funding, but on the other side it's not enough for covering all these links. Their modernization requires extreme investments. Some words about our national transport policy priorities. Our transport policy is in full compliance with the European policy. Its main priorities is the sustainable, coherent transport policy, the efficient modernization and maintenance of transport infrastructure development to concession, safety and security of the transport system, and accessible, innovative and environmentally friendly transport. As you see, the main part of these priorities cover transport infrastructure development. The main priorities in transport infrastructure developments, the links which are situated on the TEN-T network. You see these documents which you are well aware of, and previously we had the pan-European transport corridors and 10 pan-European transport corridors, and Bulgaria was the only country which had 5 European corridors. Now they are substituted by the networks, the core network, the comprehensive network, and we have also so many transport corridors from the core network which we have to develop till year 2030. You see them on this slide. We have 2 priority corridors which cover a very big part of our territory. The first one is the Orient, East Mediterranean corridor, which passes through 9 countries. And the other one is the Rhine-Danube corridor, which is the Rhine and Danube rivers. European funding comes and is implemented by the operational programs. We have one which is already finished from 2007-2013. This was our first operational program. You see that 98 and 49% of the total budget was used, and 120 projects implemented, 25 from which investment projects and 11 of them large-scale projects. 345 kilometers railway lines were rehabilitated, 310 kilometers new roads constructed, and 19 kilometers rehabilitated also. Also we have 20 kilometers of metro lines and 20 new metro stations constructed. You see how the financing is distributed in this first period, operational program period. You see that a lot of attention was paid to road infrastructure because the stage of its development was not very advanced, and we had to modernize a lot of links on the road network. You will see that in the next period, which is at present we are in the middle of it, we have used more money for railway development, so we are following the European policy, developing more environmentally friendly transports like railway and also inland waterways, maritime transport. One example of development of the regions in the northwest of Bulgaria, this is the construction of the Danube Bridge 2. The northwest region of Bulgaria is one of the least developed regions in Europe, the European Union, and this construction helped to get some economic growth. Over 500 employees on an annual basis were worked on the bridge during the project implementation, and the traffic increase is seen every year with 60% per year. But it still remains a lot to be required and a lot of more economic growth to be achieved, because we have to improve a lot the road and railway links on both Bulgarian and Romanian territory to have the full impact of this bridge received. This is the programming period which is going on at the moment. As I said, rail and road are now balanced. The investments are half. Also, we pay a lot of attention to the intermodal transport services for passengers and freight, and development of sustainable urban transport, innovations in management and services. And also we have this new Connecting Europe facility where we have 406 million euro allocated for projects which are in environmentally friendly modes of transport. We have looked for continuity between the first and the second period, and we have to finish the whole routes and links which we have started in the first period. That's why at the moment these investments are concentrated on this line which you see, and at the end of the period we will have full connectivity between Serbia, Bulgaria, Turkey, and to Traseka, to the port of Burgas. One very good example of good cooperation between the state and the local authority of Sofia was the construction of the Metropolitan. It is a major project with regional importance. 38 million passengers per year along the new metro sections are transported, and you see the positive impact of the Metropolitan is great, and it is ensuring better connectivity between the different parts of Sofia, decreasing the number of road accidents, improvement of the traffic conditions in Sofia, decreasing the harmful air emissions, decreasing the noise level in the city, and better traveling conditions for the citizens. So this is a project serving as an example, not only as a project without delays and a project which is going according to schedule, and also with its very big positive impact in very different spheres of the economy life. And we are continuing with the construction of third metro diameter, with which we will cover the whole area of Sofia. Up to now I spoke about projects which were developed with European money and budget, Bulgarian budget, but we see that all modernization that we have to do is needed a lot more financing, so we are using public-private partnership. We are trying to attract more private investments, so for the development and rail and for the development of port and airport terminals we use the concession. You see what is the expected impact of these public-private partnership investments. The procedures which are now open is the Plovdiv Civil Airport and the intermodal terminal of Plovdiv. And last I will speak about these new financial initiatives of the Commission, which we are trying to use for bigger projects. This is the blending call of the Connecting Europe facility and the European Fund for Strategic Investments. And we have some private investors presented projects, but they are with a small scale logistic intermodal centers. Now we are trying to develop these projects, which is the multimodal freight corridor to connect the Aegean and the Black Sea, and which is a joint initiative of the Bulgarian and the Hellenic Ministries of Transport. And it will develop the port terminals, the railway links between them, and also on the third stage, the river Danube port of Russia will also be included. So this is a very large-scale projects which will be developed both with the national budgets, the European money, and also private investments. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Savov, for a most interesting presentation, and I loved the architecture of the bridge especially. So, Mr. Francesco Bettoni now.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. First and foremost, I'd like to express thanks to President Schneider for giving me this opportunity to give you this important example of infrastructure. I would ask that we show the video very quickly to give you a better overview of the motorway we're going to be talking about, the one...
Bre-Be-Mi, a motorway constructed to meet people's needs. A35 Bre-Be-Mi is the first Italian motorway totally funded on a project financing basis for a cost of 1.61 billion euros. This infrastructure is being paid back exclusively from the income generated by the tolls, together with the collection of a final indemnity from the motorway company that will take over its management. The excellence of the Bre-Be-Mi project was awarded 2 major international prizes in London for the Best European Infrastructural Project Financing Deal, one of which was the prestigious PFI Award promoted by the Thomson Reuters Group. The functionality of this important 62.1 kilometer long motorway, which directly links Brescia to Milan, is reflected by the high number of interconnections to the local road network, with as many as 15 junctions, 6 of which have toll booths. Its construction was accompanied by many other significant improvements to the road system of the entire region. The Bre-Be-Mi Control Center is one of the most advanced in Europe in terms of technology used. It monitors with cameras the whole route of the motorway, 24 hours a day, 7 days per week, allowing traffic assistance to be present immediately when needed. The A35 Bre-Be-Mi motorway means an improved quality of life, since it reduces the volume of heavy vehicle traffic on local roads by as much as 60%. It represents 6.8 million fewer hours in traffic queues, and it gives an important contribution to clean air by reducing CO2 emissions. Moreover, it facilitates business and social relations on the European east-west axis, south of the Alps. In 2015, after just 1 year from the opening, the traffic on the motorway had already doubled. In 2016, Bre-Be-Mi achieved very positive results regarding traffic. Numbers are growing steadily with an increase of more than 25% compared to 2015. In particular, the growth in traffic volumes confirms a rise of 22% of cars and an improvement of 34% on heavy vehicles, with a big increase in total revenue tolls in 2016 of plus 28%. This significant growth in volumes is a sign of appreciation by the users on the quality of services offered in terms of new technologies such as LED lighting systems on foggy days, safety and no queues travel times by the A35 Bre-Be-Mi. During the year 2017, the 6 kilometers direct connection with the A4 motorway on the east part of the infrastructure near Brescia is actually under construction. It will finally be completed after years of bureaucracy and obstructions conducted by our competitors. Together with the opening of this important connection, included in the original project but not realized by other players, there are the 2 new services parking areas that will be ready by the end of this year with restaurants, bars and oil and gas stations. This will bring further traffic to Bre-Be-Mi. At the end of this year, A35 Bre-Be-Mi motorway will finally be completed and will be ready to give an important boost to the economy, environment and people's needs in the Lombardy region, Italy and Europe. Taking into consideration the recent developments in infrastructures with the opening of the new Gotthard Tunnel, which will significantly improve the whole logistics sector with goods, cargo and people's displacements on the north-south axis. A35 Bre-Be-Mi will ease connections and facilitate business and people's relationships.
Grazie. Grazie.
So this motorway was conceived bottom-up by public and private local and regional entities, and together with the Lombardy region, they are the forces behind this. And it was project financing that was used. Was not a single euro of government or community money. And it was considered the only feasible model in the light of the dearth of public money, as well as the many constraints stemming from the Stability Pact for public bodies. The use of the program agreement was something quite unique. And this is a new instrument, and at the time, he was the regional expert. Rafael Cattaneo is the man behind this, who's now in charge of the region as a whole. At the time, he was a local councillor when he got this going. And the through the program agreement, it was possible for the 43 municipalities and the 5 provinces to be crossed, all signed up to this Brescia-Bergamo-Milano motorway. And I've heard a lot of comments to the effect that it's so important to have the regions and the local authorities on board, and that's the basis of this motorway. It was built with the consent, and there's optical Wi-Fi networks and Wi-Fi, high-speed Wi-Fi that makes it possible for SMEs to make major investments. And a lot of attention was paid to environmental consideration, with total investments of more than 100 million euros for environmental mitigation engineering. And I would like to point out that there are 11 tunnels that are there to protect the fauna. There's no other motorway in Europe that can boast that, to have 11 tunnels just to protect the wildlife. The program agreement, as said, enabled the municipalities and provinces to proceed to ancillary construction to the tune of 600 million euros to improve overall road conditions by building ring roads, upgrades of national and provincial roads, viaducts, underpasses, roundabouts, and improvements to the irrigation system for farmers, and a host of other infrastructure which have made local enterprises highly competitive and enable us to showcase our typical high-quality agricultural and agribusiness products, not to mention artistic and architectonic and wealth and beautiful countryside. This motorway, once interconnection with the A4 is complete, which was mentioned in the video, should be the case by the end of the year, will allow the entire area it runs through to be one of the most competitive, up-to-date, and innovative of not just Lombardy, but of Italy. Thank you for your attention.
Congratulations, Mr. Patroni, and congratulations to our dear colleague, Mr. Cattaneo. Mr. José Ramón Díez de Revenga Albacete has the floor now, please.
I have a presentation. Permítanme que me exprese en español.
Please allow me to speak in Spanish. The speaker kindly thanks the interpreters. Thanks to the great city of Brindisi for inviting us to this event. Murcia, the region I come from, is a peripheral region in Europe with a very important fruit and vegetable production. I'm not going to bore you with data, but according to an export calculation, there are weekly exports of over 6,400 lorries a week from my region. Now, trains that could go to Europe with agro-food products could reach a number of 143 per week, if allowed. In this region, there are some 5,000 transport companies that give work to more than 25,000 people. They generate activity over 1.8 billion euros a year and constitute 5% of regional GDP. As an example, I could say that our region has a leading cooling fleet in Europe. Now, our city is responsible for significant exports, but its problem is that it's at one edge of Europe, and transport has always been complicated, something similar to the situation in Brindisi. The Mediterranean corridor is a symbol of cohesion between regions, a 1,300 kilometer project that would link up Murcia with the rest of Europe. An infrastructure covering 4 Spanish regions that represent 50% of Spain's population and 45% of GDP, with 60% of export companies there. Now, for all of those reasons, the Mediterranean corridor represents for us a safe investment in the future for the development of employment. It's fundamental infrastructure for our region, as it is for many of your regions as well. But I'm not here to talk about the Mediterranean corridor. I'm here to tell you about how, because of the priority our regional government gives to this project, Murcia is seeing significant presence in a number of regional and national fora related to this major project. Of course, we're working intensely in corridor meetings together with the Ministry for Public Works in our country and the European Committee of the Regions. And I should like to thank our EPP group for its excellent support. And Murcia is heading a group on exports in one of these groups, and we work with our central government to define national projects, and we created the National Forum for the Mediterranean Corridor. We support other private initiatives such as Quiero Corredor, which is a group of companies that have joined together to fight in favor of this infrastructure, and the Fermet lobby, which is supranational. We also are involved in local authority initiatives to disseminate the importance of this project. Aware of the scope of this project, we're clear about the fact that it's not just a national challenge, but it's a challenge for our whole region. That's why in March, the president of the region of Murcia saw the constitution of the Mediterranean Corridor Forum, a multi-level space with academic, economic and social representation, so that we can work together to put forward our legitimate interests with regard to the creation of this infrastructure. Our region wants to send to the Spanish authorities and the European authorities our aim with regard to this initiative, justifying the huge expectations in all areas of our society. Now, this forum represents the autonomous community, the region, the national government delegation, the Port Authority, the Federation of Municipalities and Provinces, Chambers of Commerce, at least 20 professional associations in the region, numerous management organizations, and also professional associations representing different bodies. Now, the aim is to propose and participate in all kinds of investment in infrastructure, and we also deal with the necessary planning that's needed in the region and the connection with regions and neighboring countries. All of this is to structure an infrastructure that will connect Europe economically and socially, as has been said today at this event. It should act as a backbone to meet the needs of all of the societies involved. Now, we represent a significant socio-economic space throughout Europe, and Laurens van Brinkhoff, our coordinator, is overseeing all of this. Now, the construction of the corridor would represented significant amounts of investment. Now, if the Mediterranean is included in this, there will be an influence over some 54% of inhabitants in the region, and there'll be 66% generation of GDP. In addition to all of this, the regional government is extremely aware of the financing opportunities available from the European Union. In 2014, the European Commission supported a project in the Connecting Europe framework in the transport sector. Now, this is about the creation of projects for intermodal activities and logistic activities in Murcia for transport and goods transport by road and by rail. The project is a 6-year project with a €2 million budget, and all of you are contributing to that, about 50% of the project. It's currently working on plans for territorial insertion and logistics, and the construction of intermodal and logistics facilities. Once the project's concluded, the different bodies, public and private, very important areas when it comes to public-private cooperation, will participate in the execution of the works and will also be seeking EU funding for those as well. We have been watching carefully the CF blending call relating to improving transport within the Connecting Europe mechanism. This is a call that combines €1 billion with additional funding from various areas, public and private. The aim is to maximize the multiplier effect of the participation and private capital in the project. The regional government is also looking at such initiatives with interest. By way of conclusion, or key messages that we'd like to share with all of you, I'd like to say that the region of Murcia has economic and geographical features that require ambitious projects such as the Mediterranean corridor, and we have to think about those in combination with the European Union framework, which is why we've tried to involve all of society in the importance of this decision, and we've involved them to work together with us to define all of this with excellent results, I should say, and we would invite you to do similar things in your region. In addition, we've been seeking co-financing mechanisms in Europe with a view to making the common European project even more solid. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Albacete. And now, finally, the floor. Mr. Marchiotti has the floor, please.
If I can have the remote, please, just a second. I have a short presentation as well. Yes. Thank you. Thanks. Grazie a tutti, buongiorno.
Good afternoon, everybody. Would you mind putting the presentation on the screen?
Ok, grazie. Allora, tenterò di essere veloce visto che sono l'ultimo prima del vostro pranzo.
I'll try to be brief if possible. I'll start by saying that investment in the transport sector is not for Italy or Europe just an option, it's a need at the moment. And this comes from and stems from a number of reasons, particularly related to climate change, as mentioned by President Tajani. Now, the sector in Italy represents the largest contributor to CO2 emissions in Italy. Now, the electric sector has seen a significant change, particularly through the 2020 project and a number of packages. So the transport sector is slightly behind the energy sector. Now, road transport, almost all the vehicles we see involve fossil fuels emissions. Now, there are a number of paths from a Deloitte study, and we can see that if we want to change by 2050, it seems a long way away, but it is practically tomorrow. We need to think about significant change. Now, we'll do this with local tools and Europe on the Move package, which will be dealt with by the Parliament at the end of the year. Now, talking about needs, there's another reason that we need to think about, and that's contamination or pollution. About 82% of urban areas are exposed to significant levels of air pollutants harmful to health. And in Italy, now this data comes from the European Environment Agency, but is backed up by other studies, about 66,000 premature deaths in Italy, and 21,000 premature deaths attributable to NO2, the majority because of transport, particularly diesel cars and the heating area. Now, without external funding, it would appear that we can't invest in infrastructure or modernization. But when we look at the sector overall, we can see that in Europe, we spend about 600 billion euros a year in human health related to fossil transport-induced air pollution, and that comes from a European Commission study and a number of other subsequent studies. Of the 253 million traditional cars in Europe today, a number are polluting. Now, if we look at this money, we create an expenditure heading. We can do a lot of things with this money that we're wasting, but Europe is investing money in transport. But with what we could save in a year in healthcare costs, through the modernization of the sector, we could pay for all of the necessary transport infrastructure costs, and we would have substantial funds in order to change the vehicle stock. This doesn't mean that funding isn't important. Europe's done a great deal, particularly during this legislature, assigning about 30 billion euros to infrastructure and innovation for transport. Now, we're from the electric sector, and when we look at these figures, we see that the transport sector doesn't use so much. Now, almost all of the funds assigned for infrastructure is used in green projects, and so there's a lack of investment of European funds for infrastructure in the sector. Then if we look at technology, there's a difference. About 50% of the funds are used in the first few years. So there's a number of funds that are available that could be used for a number of things. And there's a 300 program, which is a program that spends a couple of $1 billion on the sector. That money hasn't really been used and is still available. Now, I'm going to talk about some success stories. The first is the Ever Plus project. That was recently approved for funding through the CEF, about 50%, 8 million euros investment, with the establishment of 200 fast charging stations in almost all Italian highways. That's being developed, and that will continue the next year. Now, this is a project and without funding, that wouldn't have been possible. And it's changing the way in which operators such as Nissan, BMW, and Audi are working. They've joined up with the project and will be able to modernize Italian infrastructure through this. And it will enable us European citizens to get from Sicily to Austria and Austria to the rest of Europe, even with electric vehicles. Another interesting case, this didn't receive EU funding, but I'll talk to you about it. It's Vehicle to Grid. It's a Copenhagen-based project that focuses on the opening up of transport sectors. It saw that investments aren't sufficient and focuses on CO2 emissions. In Europe, an urban vehicle is parked for about 95% of the time. We use it an hour in the morning to get to work, and then we leave it parked 12 hours at work, and then we drive it another half hour home and then leave it in the garage. Now, for electrical companies, an electric vehicle parked for that time has a battery that can be hooked up to the grid, and all of these batteries hooked up to the grid would be very important and interesting. This is a pilot project taking place in Copenhagen, and the aim is to reduce the volatility of the grid. Now, local users, and they're Frederiksberg for signing, they have been monitoring this conversion of cars. And this is an example of innovation that is being pushed by Horizon 2020 and could be carried out with European funds and private funds to finance the transition in this sector. Now, in order to conclude, I'll just highlight a couple of messages. Modernization of transport can't wait any longer. It's an energy issue, climate change issue, and a number of complications and opportunities across sector. In order to modernize, it needs new infrastructure and new innovation, and these need to be thought about to resolve the problems that we want to address. For example, reduction of CO2 emissions, air quality, congestion. European funding is critical, but it's not the only kind of funding. We need to look outside the specific sectors. We need a more comprehensive 360-degree approach to think about health, transport, and energy, and taxation. This is very important as well in this sector. And then the energy transition isn't just something that's going to happen in the future, it's already happening. And we've heard that from previous speakers, and it's accelerating, and this is an opportunity that we must not miss out on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Melchiotti. Do you have any questions? Anybody? No? Thank you. Now I would like to ask you to remain in your seats because President Schneider is chairing the final part, isn't he? Well, there is a change in the program. I will chair the final part, which is about a declaration that we have to approve. So, anybody wants to say anything? Yes, Mr. Kokinos.
Charalambos Kokinos. I'm Deputy Governor of the Southern Aegean from Greece. We're talking about the Dodecanese and the Cyclades. Madam Chair and dear members, in the declaration we're going to approve, may I ask that we include some reference, at least, to transport in light of the specificities of the insular and remote areas in Europe. I'm saying this on the basis of my personal experience, because in the Aegean, and in particular in the Southern Aegean, we have the Dodecanese and the Cyclades, Rhodes, Santorini, Mykonos, among others, but we have another 48 islands for which we struggle on a daily basis in order to foster development and, of course, transport, which is a prerequisite for growth. Allow me to add as well that, of course, we build on co-financed projects, EU projects for ports, airports, etc. However, I personally believe we should make one more reference here in the declaration related to the required amendment of some rules in order to include hydroplanes, seaplanes in Greece. This is another important factor. It's not just about the islands of Greece. It applies, of course, to all islands all over Europe. We have the Baleares and other islands in the Atlantic and elsewhere. So in this declaration, among other very appropriate comments, we should also include a special reference, as I said, to these particular populations who live on rocks, so to speak, trying to survive and sustaining Europe. This applies also to Cyprus, to the Greek islands, because these islands are border areas of the EU, in light, of course, of the refugee and migrant crisis. Thank you.
That the islands are included in the declaration, and it's what I mentioned before taking the floor. So I will please ask the members to send amendments to the EPP Secretariat, if they do have some, we have to finish now. I want to thank everybody, especially the speakers, for the most interesting and future-looking speeches and presentations. I want to thank the colleagues who were courageous enough to stay until the end with us. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Datis, who is not here, for hosting this EPP group seminar. Thank you all. Have a safe trip back home.